Welcome back to the Hand Toolery. I'm Andrew Malacy. Today we're continuing the sideboard project and I'm going to be making the top. And the reason why I'm actually starting with the top after having roughed out the legs and whatnot is because I've got these 5/4 boards that are also some of the longer boards I have, and because I'm going to be making a really large panel out of them, I bought them thick so that way I can glue them all up and then allow it to move a little bit and then go ahead and flatten it. So I'm going to flatten it once now and then I'm going to flatten it once more when it's all done, and I'm going to be securing it to the top. What I like to do when I'm going to do something like this, I have this really large panel that's going to be the top, is I like to really take my time and plan it out. And one of the things you have to consider is that you're not going to be able to use the whole board. So I'm going to choose the best parts of both these pieces to glue up. So I'm actually measuring out the usable dimensions. And to do that, you sort of have to see exactly what you're dealing with. I'm not trying to flatten this board at all. I'm just trying to take the saw marks off and get an idea of what I'm going to be working with here. So I take my scrub plane and I just, like I said, I take the saw marks off and just get an idea of what I can get out of this board. Then I just repeat the process for the other board. I'm really only doing this on one side of the boards because I've already taken the time to sort of figure out what's the nicer side. You can get a good idea before you even do any planing, actually. All right, real quick about what I'm doing on these two long wide boards, which are going to become the top. I hadn't noticed this when I picked them out, but they look to be sequential. If you look on this, there's a check here, and then there's a check here. There's this knot here and here. This side is almost all sapwood underneath here, so that's definitely going to be the bottom. And I believe that I can essentially book match them, which is going to be really, really cool. The problem is that with this being so much sapwood on this board, I should have looked closer when I flipped it over, but whatever. This one has a bug hole here and on the underneath too, so there's more sapwood right here and less on the underside, but the sapwood is less on this side, so I'm sort of trying to navigate exactly what I need. In total, I need this to be 18 inches. And so I probably need like 18 and a half or so just to make sure I get what I need. And so from sapwood to sapwood is where I'm going to measure. All right, I brought these two boards together, and from sapwood to sapwood right here, I've got 20 inches. So I'm okay right here. I've got about 20 inches. I'm a little nervous that this will take away my 18 right here, but it's okay. I think if I have a stripe running down the center or a little bit lighter stuff on the front or the back. If anything, I'll put it towards the back, and then I'll cut the sapwood off the front, cut it out of the middle, and then maybe leave it a little on the back. We'll see. If I measure to this, there's a little hole there. If I measure to that hole, I've got 21 inches. Let me take it off a little bit. I got an 18. I mean, it's gonna be close. I think what I'm gonna do is strike a chalk line and cut away, leaving enough room for me to plane away material and square it all up and joint it and whatnot. The process for this is surprisingly simple. You just hook the chalk line on one end, right basically on the limit of what you want to keep and what's going to become waste. You stretch the line really taut across to the other end and do the same thing there. And then I just basically make sure I leave a lot of room whenever I cut. Alright, since I squared up one edge on either side, I'm going to just cut off the damage here. And right here what I'm doing is I'm placing the top board on there, which is the board I've already planed and jointed the edge on, and then I just look to see if there's a gap between them. And then if there is, I go back and address that gap. As you can see, there's a slight gap, and I'm going to go address it with the plane. And once the boards meet up really nice and tight between the two, you can go ahead and glue them up. It's really quite simple. Now there are a lot of ways that you can do this. You can use dowels, you can use biscuits or whatever, but I really just like to glue them up and put cawls on the top and bottom and just make sure that they're nice and flush with each other that way, and it works pretty well for me. And quite frankly, everything was going to plan and I was really satisfied with this. And then when I took the clamps off, as you'll see in just a second here, I decided to make a huge alteration. I actually sawed the whole thing apart, planed away much more sapwood, and then I had to add a strip in the middle. And originally the strip looked to be a very similar color, but then after I glued it and then I started to flatten the top a little bit just to get everything on the same level, I realized that the color was really quite different. So right here I'm actually thinking, man, I should have just left well enough alone and left the sapwood. But it's growing on me at this point, and here I am just flushing up the ends, leaving it about an inch and a half to 2 inches longer than I need it. So now you get an idea of the scale and also the color variance between it, but like I said, it's starting to grow on me. And so now that I've got a full-size panel that I'm going to be using for the top, I have to go about the business of flattening it. So I basically just take my straight edge, and I'm using this wax or China crayon, I think it's called, and I'm just going along marking the high spots because there's a huge dip in the middle now. It doesn't really matter. Again, I'm not trying to bring this into perfect flat yet. What I'm actually wanting to do is just address these high spots so when I flip this panel over, it doesn't rock or teeter-totter back and forth. And so basically I'm just trying to erase the lines that I scribbled on there by doing whatever I have to do with the scrub plane. And while I know you're supposed to use the scrub plane across the grain, what I'm really trying to do is just remove these high spots. So I do that in whatever's the most efficient, expedient manner possible. And so in some cases it's going with the grain, and sometimes it's going across the grain. So now I'm basically just going to flip the panel over and do the same thing. I'm trying to remove any high spots, especially on the corners, so it doesn't teeter-totter. When I eventually flip it back over and have the top side up, I want this to be very stable, so it's not warping as I'm planing it, because if I'm trying to flatten it and it's just teetering back and forth, I'm actually not going to be doing much good because it is distorting under the weight and pressure of me planing. Now the really astute observers among you might have noticed that I went from a Stanley 4 to a Stanley 5 here, and what I did is I just switched out the iron. I put the scrub plane iron in my 5 because at this point I had removed a lot of the really high spots with the 4, and with the 5 it's got a larger footprint, a larger surface area, and it creates for a more level, flat surface. Eventually I'll bring it up to a longer plane as well, but I'm not going to make this perfect again. I'm just going to make it so it's good and flat and stable. And now that I've determined it's pretty much flat across the width, I'm going to flip it over and see how much it actually rocks back and forth. And it's quite significant. So I flip it back over and address those spots. And then I'm able to flip it over once more, and you can see I have really no teeter-totter at all. It's just like an 1/8 inch, maybe 3/16, and it's pretty stable at this point. The way I actually go about flattening the tops of these panels, for example, because they're kind of hard, you're putting a lot of pressure on them and they're hard to clamp, is I actually clamp a long board that's about the same thickness across the bench. And I try to make sure that the clamps are spread out further than my panel is long or wide, so I'm not running the risk of bumping into them and denting my planes. And so then what I essentially do is I don't have to worry about tear out on the back edge. It's because I go straight across the back batten board, and I can blow out the fibers on the back board without messing up my own top here, because I'm not leaving myself a whole lot of extra thickness. This is still the Stanley number 5 with the scrub plane iron in it. I'm just taking different types of passes, straight across, diagonally one way, diagonally the other way back, and I'm just trying to bring it all into flat. I even use my winding sticks and just the flat edge, so I'm always referencing. And then finally, when it's time, I break out the big guns and I bring out the Stanley number 8. I've got it set for like a medium thickness shaving because I do want to address the high spots and make sure it all comes into flat, but I'm not trying to remove a ton of material. I'm only trying to make sure the panel's flat and not take off a whole lot of thickness. You can hear how it's skipping over the middle in this section, but in just a second, on this end, you can see that it takes a continuous shaving, and that's what we want. When I get that all the way across the panel, I know my work is pretty much done for today. And that's the result. I've got a nice panel that's pretty close to flat and true, and I just got to do the final cleanup work on it. You can see the straight edge shows just how close to tolerance we are. It's not bowing or cupping in any direction. We have a little bit of a gap there at the bottom, but I'm fine with that. And since we've exposed all this new wood today, what I'm going to do is going to take this quick close clamp. I'm going to remove one end, stick it through the middle of my tool well on the Rubo bench, reattach it, and then I'll be able to clamp the whole thing down because I really do not want this to move. And then after a day or so, maybe 2 days of it just being nice and stabilized by the clamps, I'm going to release it and then put all the pieces I cut on top of this to keep weighing it down. But by then it should be fairly stable. Well, thanks so much for watching as I made the top for my sideboard project. I really hope it's been enjoyable and useful. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you around here for the next one.